Hi there. I hope you're all doing okay. Thank you for joining me today. Before I go any further, let me just quickly say I'm really grateful for everybody that has tuned in so far, who has liked and subscribed. If you could please hit the subscribe or like button if you're listening or watching, and don't forget to share me with your friends. So today I'm talking about my first birth experience from 2018 when I had my son. I have got a little guide in front of me on a screen, which you can probably see reflecting off my glasses. It's just so that I can refer back to things. So I've got a blog on my website with the story on, and I'll post that in the details below. And that's basically what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to talk quickly about the experiences today because I want to delve into them on a much deeper level another day. But because this is my first month, I'm just really wanting you to get to know me a bit more. Okay, so I had my son in 2018. January 2018, and I never did hypnobirthing when I was pregnant. I did prenatal yoga, which I found incredibly beneficial, and I read a fantastic book called the Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, which was incredibly beneficial in that it taught me a lot about how our bodies instinctively know what they're doing, and a lot about how people give birth in other areas of the world as well. So I found that really useful. I was really determined that I didn't want to be induced for this pregnancy, but spoiler alert, I was on my blog. This is called My Positive Induction Story. So when I was around 40 weeks, I declined a sweep from my midwife. I'd really just wanted to go into labour spontaneously, and having a sweep is sort of the very first stage of induction. So I declined that, but we agreed at that point that I would book an induction for when I got to 42 weeks. And I was just really hoping at that point that I'd go into labour before that point. Side note, you do not have to book in an induction at any point unless it's something that you are happy to go ahead with. So she rang the hospital, she booked me in, and in the meantime I agreed that I would go and have an appointment at our local hospital where I was planning on giving birth, so that they could just check in and make sure that everything was okay. So I went when I was about 41 weeks to the hospital, and they did their checks. They really tried to encourage me to arrange an induction sooner than the 42 weeks point. The reason being that they were concerned about the increase in stillbirth. Now, I'm not going to go into the statistics about stillbirths on this episode, only to say that what I was told by a doctor was that he couldn't tell me what to do. He couldn't make the decision for me, but that risk increase is something that I need to be aware of. He didn't quantify the details. He didn't give me any further information. That he just kind of shrugged and left. So we agreed that I would have a vaginal exam at that point, so that she could see if I was dilated at all, to give us an indicator of whether or not labour was fairly imminent. She said that I was 1 centimetre dilated, and then she went off to check something, I'm not sure what, but while she was gone we agreed that we would go for the induction sooner rather than later, because I just suddenly felt a little bit like I was being selfish, and when I look back on that I feel like that's ridiculous for me, because we could have asked for more time to think about it. We could have asked for, we could have said, well, we'd like to go to the 42 weeks, but I'm quite happy to have regular checks just to make sure that everything does continue to be okay, but we didn't. We just agreed to it there and then. I'm saying that this feels a bit ridiculous, but as you'll find out, I did have very positive experience, and I might not have had the same experience if I hadn't done this. We just don't know. So there is that to think about as well. So we got booked in for the day after. So we went home, got ourselves sorted, told all the people that needed to know, including my sister, who was going to be my second birth partner. Did a little bit of reading, didn't sleep particularly well. The next day we finished packing our bags, we made sure we saw both sets of our parents, went out for lunch, just tried to kind of have as much of a normal day as possible, and then we were at the hospital for 5 p.m. So they did all the checks that they need to do. They showed me where my bed was, asked me a few questions, and then it was off to be given a pessary. So back in 2018, you were offered a pessary induction to start you off with. They didn't have the balloon induction as an option at that point, or at least not where I was giving birth. I was quite happy with the pessary. I knew that I didn't want to be put on the hormone drip. So we went off to have that. It's a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit like having a sweep, not a sweep, a little bit like having a smear. But you know, the learning breathing techniques through hypnobirthing would have been really beneficial to me at that point, which was something I hadn't done. So it's just another benefit to doing hypnobirthing. They said they would leave me about 6 hours, and then they would do an examination, possibly give me another pessary. So we went off to do a big walk around the hospital. So the hospital that I gave birth in, they have two very long corridors on 2 floors. So we would basically do one corridor, go downstairs, go to the bottom of that corridor, go across to the other side, up, and just did like a loop like that for as long as we could. My husband had to leave, I think it was 8 or 9 o'clock. So off he went, and I just tried to get sort of settled in for the night. They came and they checked me and gave me another pessary. And nothing had really changed at that point. And they put me on a monitor at one point in the night for quite a long time to just check the baby was okay as well. And then through the night, nothing was really happening. And what they told me was that if it got to the morning and I hadn't progressed, they would have to wait another 18 hours before giving me another pessary. And this made me kind of panic a little bit because A, I didn't want to just keep waiting around for labour to start. And B, I was then concerned after 18 hours and another pessary, what would they then suggest as an option? So like I said, I didn't want to be put on the hormone drip. So I was a little bit anxious about that. The next morning, after having a few sort of little tingles through the night, little twinges, not tingles, I was eating my breakfast at about 7:30 and I felt my first sensation, my first contraction. Up until that point, it had been very mild cramps, and I just thought, oh, like, I have to actually concentrate on what's going on right now. I had to stop eating. So these started coming and going, and I started timing them, and they were fairly quick to pick up, and they weren't particularly far apart. So let's have a look. So when I first started climbing them, when I first started recording them, they were about 3 to 4 minutes apart, and they started to increase in intensity. I buzzed for the midwife at that point, but she said that they were in the middle of doing the changeover, so there was nobody available to examine me. So I just had to keep waiting, basically. My husband arrived at 9 a.m. And they let him in, and at that point the contractions were 3 minutes apart and they were lasting about 40 to 50 seconds. He did ask for paracetamol for me, although thinking back I don't think it would have made a single bit of difference. But at about 10 or 10:30 anyway, the midwife came along and said, right, we're done doing the switch over, we'll take you along to examine you. So when they took me along, there was a doctor the doctor comes in to examine at that point because he has to determine if there's enough space to get into brachy waters for this particular way that I was being induced. Of course, having your waters broken is always a choice. I didn't know that at that point. So he determined there was enough space, which was, to be honest, a bit of a relief because I didn't really want to wait the 18 hours for the next pessary. So we went and got our stuff. My husband got in touch with my sister, who was my second birthing partner. And we got introduced to our midwife, who was absolutely lovely. She's quite newly trained, but she was really nice. She checked through my birth plan. She did tell us that we won't be able to use the birth pool because of the induction. I now know as well that they can't refuse that. They did say that I may also still have to have the hormone drip, although again, they can't tell you that you have to have a hormone drip if you don't want it. They got me out of birth ball and the gas and air, which I was really pleased with, and at about 11:15, they burst my waters. Now, that was very, very straightforward for me. It wasn't particularly uncomfortable, and my water sac wasn't very big, so there wasn't a lot of water that came out. But I continued to manage things after that with the birth ball, lots of movement, gas and air, and I had a TENS machine as well. I was also put on the monitor for a little bit and came off that at about 11:10. Things started to really ramp up at about 12:30, and I sort of started to get to a point where I wasn't really focusing on what was going on around me, and I was just focusing on the contractions. Things got very, very painful after that, and I sort of tried to start moving where I was, changing the position I was in. I tried leaning on the bed and like sort of rocking backwards and forwards or like side to side, which helped quite a lot. At this point, my contractions were about 1.5 minutes apart. I got checked at this point and told that I was 4 centimetres, which, to be honest, at that point with how I was feeling was a little bit disheartening. And I was told that I'd be checked again in 4 hours, but they were quite happy with how I was progressing. They didn't think I would need the hormone drip. So 4 hours, I was kind of thinking, oh, I don't want to go 4 hours. I also really, really desperately needed a wee all through this whole experience, and I don't know how I didn't wee myself. I could not go to the toilet. I tried. Once I'd got to this stage, I did start to consider having further pain relief. I didn't want to do that for lots of different reasons. And my sister said something really fantastic to me, which was, if we knew how long we would be in labour for, we would be able to gauge if we needed pain relief or not, because well, this is going to last half an hour longer. You think, well, okay, half an hour will be over before I know. But if you think, well, it's going to last 10 more hours, then you kind of think, right, okay, I need a break. But then something very interesting started to happen, and I realised at this point that actually, when I got to that point of doubt, I was transitioning, but I didn't really realise that at the time. But I could tell that something was happening, but it felt too soon. So I didn't really want to say anything, but I could actually start to like really feel the baby bearing down, and like I was gonna poo myself. So my midwife decided to give me another check. It hadn't been 4 hours, so she had checked me last at I'm just checking my notes. She had checked me at 12:30-ish, and I was 4 centimetres. So then at about 2:25, she popped me on the monitor again. And as I got on the bed, I felt like something was happening. She couldn't pick the baby's heartbeat up on the monitor, so she said that she was going to put an electrode clip on the baby's head. Again, something that I wasn't very informed about. But when she went to do it, she just kind of appeared over my legs and said something that my sister thought was, she's still only 4 centimetres dilated. And it was actually, she's 10 centimetres dilated. So I had gone 4 centimetres dilated to 10 centimetres dilated in nearly 2 hours. So less than 2 hours, I think. The room very quickly got very busy, which panicked my husband a little bit, but it just turns out, I found out after the fact, that it was a quiet day on the ward, and so that we were a bit like, oh, who's this person that's gone into labour very, very quickly. I did end up birthing on my back, which I didn't want. I did have my legs in stirrups, which I didn't want. But at this point, I didn't really feel like I was in a position to say, can I do this, or can I do that, or can I change? Because it just all was happening so fast. I was told to basically hold my chin down on my chest and hold my breath, which is a terrible breathing technique, but that's what I did. And I pushed with all my might. I had moments where I thought, this baby is not going to come out, and the surgeon that had checked to see if my waters could be broken was actually standing in the room saying to me, he's going to be out on the next push. And I was shouting back, oh no, he won't. And sure enough, out he came. She did get scalpel ready for an episiotomy, which I didn't need, but I did tear. I did tear at, I had a 2nd degree tear in my perineum, and a tear elsewhere that I'm not going to go into right now, but none of them were particularly severe and were taken care of by stitches. So he was born at 2:53 p.m. I have written in my blog that it took around 3 to 4 contractions to birth him, with about 2 to 3 pushes per contraction. We did slight delayed cord clamping, not for as long as I would have liked. And then I had a managed placental delivery, because I'd never really considered the option of not doing that. And to be honest, it was probably better that I did do that, because my placenta actually started to separate as I was birthing it, so I still had to physically push it out anyways, though I were birthing it. And then I had some stitches afterwards. It was all fairly straightforward. It was very positive. My established labour was 2 hours and 17 minutes, but considering my first contraction was at 7:30 in the morning, I think I laboured in total for about 7 hours and 23 minutes, which makes me think that if I hadn't been induced, he would have come himself quite quickly following those in the days following anyway. I lost about 450 mils of blood, and I still managed to look incredibly pale. He was £6.6, which they were all surprised about, because they thought he was going to be about £7.1, so they were a bit surprised about that, and that actually had an impact on my next pregnancy. So that's a very just quick rundown of my first labour. Like I say, I want to look into them in more depth at some point and talk in more detail about each stage and the hours following and things like that, but just not today. So my next post will be my second labour, which you'll find was quite similar and at the same time extremely different to my first one. So thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share. Thank you.